Hi again. This past weekend, I received 3 emails from 3 different women in 3 different areas of the world, and I actually wanted to read out a little bit of one of those letters. I won't share names or locations, but this one was just so sweet. Hello, dear Catherine. I feel baffled, excited, but mostly ecstatic about having found your channel. One of the reasons being that you provide excellent information about the vulva, the other reason being that my Vulvodynia and Vestibulodynia story is eerily similar to yours. Long story short, I was prescribed the contraceptive pill even before I got my first period, and a few years later started experiencing my first Vulvodynia and Vestibulodynia symptoms, namely the recurring yeast infections, the intense burning sensations, the supposed bladder issues that turned out to be a tense pelvic floor. Throughout the next 7 years, I would see countless doctors and undergo countless treatments. You know the drill. However, I was never able to find out the main culprit, which I believe I might have found now thanks to you and your channel. In all honesty, I had given up on ever being able to live a liberated, pain-free life. Honestly, I'm amazed I could even get through that. The first time I read her email, I was sobbing in tears. I get really sad when I read your emails because I know exactly how you're feeling, and as silly as I feel sometimes making this YouTube channel about vagina problems, I hope that I can share my story and information so that someone else doesn't have to feel so alone in this. For 10 years, I also struggled with burning, rawness, redness, chronic infections, and pain with sex, all of it. If you haven't seen part 1 to my Vulvodynia story, just click the link above. I had a most unfortunate reaction to a medication to treat an infection I never had that triggered years of awful pain. I literally felt like my skin was going to peel off my body. I wasn't able to have normal intercourse for a really long time without pain. And to be honest, sometimes it's still not possible, but I think that I'm in a much better place now than I've ever been before in my life, and there's a few things that are really helping. I need to rewind a little bit here. I mentioned in my previous video I went to see Dr. Andrew Goldstein at the Center for Vulvovaginal Disorders in Washington, D.C. But before that, I spent over 2 years going down to Arizona to see Dr. Fowler at Fowler Gyne Please in Scottsdale, Arizona. I had heard about him through other women here in Canada, and my experience with him was also positive in some respects. I know some women aren't a fan, but I thought he was all right. He takes a more pathological approach and looks at different sets of tests and is really more interested in altered microflora patterns. I had gone to see him initially because what I thought I was experiencing were yeast infections that wouldn't go away. And I had read he was really good at looking at resistant infections and strange infections that wouldn't go away or would keep coming back. So his test determined I had very low levels of mature squamous cells and something called inflammatory vaginitis. So what I was experiencing could have been yeast infections, or it could have been an irritated vaginal microflora. In hindsight, the problem was that he couldn't identify what was causing this in the first place, a piece that Dr. Goldstein figured out right away. When I was in Arizona, I did Dr. Fowler's full treatment protocol, which consisted of many months of antibiotics, antifungals, steroid cream, clindamycin, and doxycycline. He also prescribed an estrogen cream, which I applied vaginally along with all those other medications. His treatment worked pretty well for the first year, I would say. I saw some resolution, but there was a piece of the puzzle missing, and unfortunately, I never needed all those additional medications. He didn't advise me to stop taking the birth control pill and even recommended that I stay on it. It's really unfortunate that happened because I spent thousands of dollars on medications from the United States, not to mention traveling back and forth, including the cost of the visits because I couldn't get some of the medications up here in Canada, and actually using turconazole cream, which was one of the antifungals that was recommended, along with the suppositories. Using those long-term ended up really damaging my tissues in the long run, and I think caused me a lot of the issues I have with vestibulodynia. So I traveled to Washington, D.C. to see Dr. Andrew Goldstein before COVID happened, and then I saw him again at his New York office about 4 months after my initial appointment for a follow-up. I cannot say enough good things about this center and the team he has working there from start to finish. It was just a great experience for me. And keep in mind, I am no stranger to seeing doctors and specialists and naturopaths. everyone for this condition. I have been poked, I have been prodded, I have been tested on for 10 years, so the testing that he did at his clinic was super simple and straightforward. I will admit I was pretty scared, though. I went down to Washington D.C. alone. I was by myself. It's daunting to do this sort of thing. It's a really big investment to see physicians in other countries, especially when you're paying out of pocket. But honestly, it was the best decision I ever made. If I think about how much money I spent over the past 10 years, this was really a no-brainer. Plus, for my follow-up visit, New York is amazing. And Dr. Goldstein has an office right near Times Square, in the heart of it all. So I really tried to make the travel I had to do for this condition worth it, and it was exciting to go to New York. The testing. Many people want to know what his testing is like and what his treatment protocols are, and honestly, it's going to depend on what your specific issue is, but for my Vestibulodynia and Vulvodynia diagnosis, he took swabs and cultures. He did something called a Q-tip test for pain response, and that's basically where they take a Q-tip and touch different areas along your vestibule and labia to pinpoint exactly where the pain is and how strong it is. Vestibulodynia, for those of you that don't know, follow a pretty standard pain pattern, and it's similar for most women who have it, so that was a pretty dead giveaway for him. He also checked my tissue under a microscope. They do a vinegar test to check for things like Lichen Sclerosis and Lichen Planus to make sure there wasn't something more serious going on there. There are many different reasons for vaginal and vulvar pain. So for me, it was 100% worth it to travel to his clinic and be able to see the team that's leading the research in this area. My diagnosis: vestibulodynia and something called hypertonic pelvic floor dysfunction. Essentially what happened to me was that I was started on birth control way too young, and I was given a birth control that was typically used for women who struggle with acne. I never had acne, yet I was on this pill for more or less 10 years. And he told me that the pill had caused a thinning of my vulva and vaginal tissue, which was creating the pain and infection-like symptoms I was experiencing. And then by overusing the yeast medication I was given to treat these infections, I damaged the nerves in my tissues. So years of chronic infections and pain left me unconsciously tensing my pelvic floor muscles. And when there's pain, muscles usually tense up. This left me with an extremely tight pelvic floor and very tight muscles that just wouldn't release. Now, when muscles are tight, blood flow is restricted, and this can actually present itself as burning and swelling that doesn't go down. So his recommendation was pelvic floor physiotherapy. I see an amazing practitioner here in Vancouver who does manual release and trigger point therapy, and has taught me really good breathing techniques so I can loosen my pelvic floor muscles at home right before I go to bed. But she does manual release, so she gets right up in there to lengthen and stretch my vaginal muscles. So my treatment in depth. Discontinuing birth control pill was number one. The longer I stayed on a low-dose birth control, the worse my symptoms were getting. Now, many women believe that by taking a low dose of birth control, that's better, but it's not really the case. Low-dose birth control pills can affect hormone receptors in your vaginal area because there are so many estrogen and testosterone-rich receptors in that area, and hormone gel. Currently, I use a compounded gel that has estrogen and testosterone in it to heal my tissue and help with lubrication. The other things that have proven helpful, and what I may have to try one day if the physiotherapy doesn't help with the hypertonic pelvic floor, are Dysport Injections, basically like Botox injections into your vaginal muscles, and Diazepam Suppositories. These really interest me because it's basically compounded Xanax that you insert rectally or vaginally, and that helps to relax your muscles from the inside. So the journey isn't over yet. I still struggle with this, and there are still good days and bad days, but I like knowing that there are more treatments out there. I'm not opposed to Botox in my face, so I think it's pretty neat. We can put it in other places. And then the last thing, to clear up infections, because realistically it's more common in women who have vulvar and vaginal issues, they recommend boric acid suppositories and fluconazole for the yeast infections. Actually, one of the reasons I made my own boric acid suppositories is because they were recommended to me by physicians in the United States. And down there you can buy them over the counter. And here in Canada you have to have them compounded. You need a prescription. They're really expensive and they weren't covered by healthcare plans. So I decided to make my own, and that's actually how Intime started. So thank you again for checking out the second half to my story. If you like this content, tell me, and if there are questions you have or topics you want mentioned, make sure to subscribe and let me know in the comments. Thanks again.